Sonokinetic, probably one of the more unique library makers out there. But what is Sonokinetic? How do you get the most out of their libraries, and what libraries should you use for what kind of music, and what do I think about them? Let's take a deeper look into the Sonokinetic virtual instruments. Hi there, this is Sam with Second Tier Sound. Really nice to see you here. So let's take a deep dive into the world of Sonokinetic. But before we do that, I just wanted to mention that I'm not sponsored by Sonokinetic. I am an affiliate though, and that means that if you are interested in these libraries, you could always click the link below, and that would help my channel out a bit, if you wanted to buy a library, that is. Also, I did get access to some of the libraries, so take that into account when you listen to what I have to say about them. But my aim here is not to sell you libraries, but actually to give you good information so you know what these libraries are for and how to really use them properly so you can get the most out of them. Let's get going. So what is Sonokinetic, you might ask? Well, let's look at it this way. Normally, when you get hold of a sampled library, maybe a piano or a violin, you get a bunch of samples in a sampler that you trigger with your piano. You hit different notes and you get that note. Now, that's great, that's what all of us use, and it sounds pretty good. Technology is getting better. But there are quite a few limitations to this process. For example, you have just single notes. They don't really tie together. It's like I would speak like this and say something with nothing in between. Nobody talks like this, and actually no musician play like a sample library. Technology is getting better, but it has a tendency sometimes to sound a little bit dead. Also, there are a lot of difficult techniques that are very difficult to program right in your sample instruments. Now, some instruments are getting massive. They have so many samples of all these different ways of doing it, which is great, but the problem is that they're too huge for your hard drive, and also it's a lot of work to get those techniques sounding well. So then comes Sonokinetic. And while they do have these normal sample libraries, they also have what I find more interesting about Sonokinetic, their phrase libraries. So instead of just recording one note, they have phrases. Now, this is not unique or special to Sonokinetic, but the way they do it is quite unique. Instead of just a bunch of different phrases you can trigger, you can actually trigger them in different chords. So if you play a C chord or an F minor, you get the phrase fitting that chord. And also you get different sections of the orchestra that you can put together. Not just one section like brass or winds, but actually different parts in those sections. So you can create a lot of interesting, unique phrases yourself. And this sounds completely real, because real musicians have played these phrases, and this is an excellent way to just add that extra quality to your compositions. Sonokinetic offers quite a few of these libraries, these phrase libraries, so it can be a little bit tricky to know which one should you get, and getting all of them is quite pricey. So I thought I would show you a little bit what they sound like and also talk briefly what they are meant for. Let's start with Capriccio, which means whim or on a whim in Italian. And this is a really big, fun, lush, adventurous orchestra that lends itself really well to those kind of productions. It's recorded in 129 BPM, and you can go faster or slower, but it sounds the best if you stick around this tempo, I find. Also, briefly showing you the interface here, all the instruments look pretty much the same. They just have different colors and different instruments, obviously, but most of them have 3 parts, and this is the woodwinds. Later, I will go more into detail on how the interface really works so you can get a master at this. All right, let's look at, or rather listen to Capriccio, how it sounds like. I just wanted to say the red tracks here are my own instruments, so they're not part of the Sonokinetic library, just to spice things up a bit. But let's go with Capriccio. Next up is Grosso, which also is Italian. It means big, large, and this is a very, very big sound. It's quite similar to Capriccio in a way, but there are a few differences. First of all, it's actually recorded in 90 BPM, and also it does not have a run builder, but it does have a choir, which is really, really cool. So you get that epic sound. You can see here the interface is quite similar to the other one, just a little bit different design. So let's listen to Grosso. I just want to mention again, the red tracks are my own, not part of the library. I've actually added some runs here, so that's not part of Grosso. Anyway, let's go. Next up is Maximo, which is maximize. Anyway, it's still pretty big and large this time, but a little bit darker towards action, hero, Hans Zimmer kind of stuff. I would say the tempo is best between 120 to 130. And the interface here, you can see it's pretty much the same as before. It has 3 parts. It has 3 instruments, brass, strings, and woodwinds, and has a little bit of cooler design here. This is a brass one. So let's listen to it. And I just wanted to say again, the red tracks are my own and not part of Maximo. Now we have Largo, which is wide, also large maybe. You can see a theme here, all these big orchestras. But this one is quite different. It's much slower. It's 75 BPM and it's much more melodic and soaring. So there's actually quite a few melodic ideas you can use from this library if you're interested. You see here again, this is from the woodwinds. Same idea, 3 parts and a little bit different design, but otherwise the same concept. So let's listen to it. And again, the red tracks are my own. Just added a little bit there. Then we have Sotto, which means under, or perhaps referring to underscore. It's a really great library to create that lush, beautiful textures that are in the background. You can also create really nice pieces with it. It has lots of material, but it lends itself particularly well to those mattes and soft, lush sounds in the background. It's recorded in, well, I would say between 110 to 120 is a really good area to be in. And you can see the interface here look pretty much the same as the other ones. It comes with 3 sections, and I've added a string melody on top of this texture that I've created. Let's listen to it. Then we have indie, which is quite different than the other orchestras. This is a smaller section. Think string quartets and alike. Much more intimate, much more emotional, not this big, lush, bombastic orchestras anymore. It's recorded in 100 BPM, and you can obviously stray from that, but it sounds the best here. As you can see, the interface is very, very different this time, and I will talk more about that later. But you can see here that Sonokinetic has really developed their approach, and this is a lot easier to work with than the other libraries. Here I've just created one track because you can do all of it in one instrument, so to speak. I've not added any of my own instrument this time because I didn't find it necessary. Let's listen to indie. And then we have Noir, as you can see, quite similar to indie in terms of style and how you handle the samples. Well, the design is a little bit different. It's recorded in 100 BPM and it's towards jazz and noir kind of music. If you're into that style, this is a must-have library because it's very, very difficult to do these things well in a DAW with normal, conventional, classical instruments. But let's look at it, or rather, let's listen to it. In here, I have not added any of my own solos or anything because Noir actually comes with quite a few solo phrases. Let's listen to it. Let's also briefly mention Sonokinetic's Ostinato series and the Run instrument. Really great tools to solve some difficult problems. It's very, very difficult to program this kind of sound well with normal virtual instruments, but it's something that you really need to use quite often in an orchestra. So let's take a brief look at how that sounds. Let's start with the Woodwinds Ostinato. It's a great little tool, so I'm going to leave the interface up so you can perhaps get a little bit of an idea what's going on. And if you're interested in this instrument, I recommend going to Sonokinetic and check out their videos. They explain really well how to use this tool, but it's not difficult. It's very, very straightforward. Let's see what the Woodwinds sounds like. And let's listen to the ostinato strings. And then we have the ostinato brass. So briefly, I just want to show you this run tool. You can do quite a bit with it, but it's probably the easiest and quickest and smallest run builder out on the market. Let's just show you some things you can do with it. And so on. So let's take a deeper look into the interface, but also give you some tips and tricks on how to really make this instrument shine. If you understand one of these libraries, you do get the other ones quite well, even though they'll look a little bit different. But the idea is the same with all of these phrase libraries. So let's take a deeper look into this instrument. At the first glance, Sonokinetic library can actually be a little bit overwhelming, even though it's really nicely designed. But once you understand the concept, it's quite easy. And this that I'm showing you will work on all of the bigger orchestras. It's exactly the same idea. It's just indie and noir that is different, that I will show a little bit later. So I'm sure that you know the concept quite well. You click here and you choose what you want to play. You have different phrases here and you can listen to them by clicking this icon here. And you choose something that you like. But most people might not know that if you press twice on some of these, you get a different sample. Why is that? Well, if I choose this one again, you see there's a button here. And that means there are two versions of this sample. So I can play it. And I can change it. So it's a little bit different there, right? And other thing that most people might not know is what are these symbols? Well, that means basically how they react to your chords. We have a minor and major, and that means, I'm going to mute this here, that they have a minor version and a major version. So here's a major version. And now a major. What is par then? It means parallel. It has to do with the parallel keys. So let's take the easiest example. You might know that C major and A minor has the same notes, even though they're different chords. Not the same chord notes, but the same scale. So if I press a C major here, and now I'm gonna press an A minor. See, you see there's different keys, but it still sounds the same. It's because that note works well in both A minor and C major, and that's what parallel means. If it doesn't have anything on it, it's probably just a root note or something that doesn't affect that, so it works well on all chords. Let's look at another thing that I think a lot of people might not know, and that is how you handle how the sample is played. Let's take this whole thing and listen to it. I play F here. And when I lift the keys, you hear a round robin, it ends like... But you might not want that, because sometimes when you make changes, you might hear that round ribbon on different places and it might sound a bit weird. So you can turn that off. And up here on the right, you press softly, not hard. You turn that function off. I don't know if you saw that. Look again on my keyboard. I'll play softly here. Oh, you can't see it because my head in the way. It's up there. It's an F. Anyway, you play softly in the F. Now, when I lift the fingers, it will just turn off. There will be no round robin. All right, I'll turn it on again and I have to hit hard. That's the one thing with Sonokinetic. The keys are sensitive, so depending on how hard and how soft you hit, it will turn on and off. So now, it's there again. All right. Another thing a lot of people might not know is that if you use the pedal, it's a lot easier to do the changes. Then you don't have to hold down the keys and the changes are much smoother. Listen to this. I hold down the pedal now. Right, if I don't hold the pedal down, it's very difficult to do this well. Let's see. Yeah, it doesn't really work, actually. Don't quantize too much, because it doesn't work. These are real players that have been playing and recorded these songs or phrases, and it doesn't always match perfectly with the beat. So if you quantize everything, it might sound a little bit weird. Sometimes you have to move it a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right in order to tweak it the right way. So that's something you might want to check out. Be careful with the quantization. Noir and indie are a little bit better this way. This one is basically you turn off the mod wheel, which might be great because maybe you wouldn't do a swell with these two with the mod wheel, but this one you want to be consistent. So it's really nice. You can turn that off. ITM might be a little bit confusing. That means that the player itself is going to play the tempo that matches your tempo the best. And this is more obvious if you go too quick or too slow. But I find it's better to put it at 1x because then I don't get any surprises. It just plays the way I want it to. So I usually put everything at 1x. You can also do twice as fast, obviously, or twice as slow, or half the speed, rather. You can play around with that and see if it creates some variety. Then you have 4 versions, obviously, here, so you can also create variety. And this is really, really important. Now, one major thing for variety is the plus and minus sign. And I'm going to show you 2 things here that you might want to use this for. This basically means that you can put other harmonies on top of the other ones, because Sonokinetic only has major and minor triads. So what if you want to have some more colors in your chords? Well, you can use this thing. And how does it work? Well, if I play, let's say, a C major here. Right. If I play now the D key up here, here the top line now is playing a D major scale, which create a different color. In fact, if you're interested, that will be a sharp 11, for example. Or what if I play the B flat? So that will create a 7 sus, for example. So you can actually create different chords that way. If you don't know about how these chord structures work, I just say experiment. Just try different keys and see if it creates interesting things for you. But one thing that a lot of people forget is that you can actually change the chords down here instead. So let's say we'll have a C. We see what's good about that is that sometimes when you change chords all the time, that might work, but it might feel a bit jarring when it jumps to new key all the time. So if you want to repeat the melody, it's much smarter to do this. You make sure that this one changes, but they don't. So I press only the C chord down here, and then I just change the harmonic shift up here. A, F, G. One thing that's really great with Sonokinetic is that you can actually see how all this is done by clicking this icon here. You will get the score. And this is good for two reasons. First, you might learn how to write this, which is really, really useful if you ever want to write it out, or you can export it to your own instrument. One thing you have to make sure, though, is that you choose the right thing. So it doesn't automatically choose the chord you have played. You actually have to choose it yourself. You have to put, is it major? And then what was it? Maybe it was a C. Then you can export it. So you can export it like this. You drag it out there to any channel. Or you can just sort of look at it and learn how it's done. You can purge the instrument, so you offload if you don't have a lot of RAM, and this we talked about. So let's go under the hood a little bit on the cogwheel down here. And this is very nice and quite useful. You should really look into this if you want to get good results. By clicking the volume, you can then just add, maybe you find this one's a little bit too loud, you can lower it a little bit, yeah? Pan, you can change a little bit if it's more in the middle, left or right, and this can make a wider sound if you're interested in that. You can also change the microphones, obviously, but this is another way to do it. Then X-fade, really important. Let's have two chords. So you might not like those transitions. Actually, this one's pretty good, but let's show you anyway. Let's say there's no crossfade between the samples like this. We'll take these two here. Let's listen. It worked quite well because I was lucky to be quick there. But if you find that this doesn't work well, it sounds too jarring, you can try to change the crossfade, how long it's going to change. And on certain samples, it's better to have longer crossfades, and on some samples, it's better to have a shorter crossfade. So you can mess with that and see if you get smooth transition, so it sounds more realistic. Then we have offset, which I don't use myself too often, but it's a great way to get variety. It says when the sample is going to be played, in what section. So if I put that one here, you might not hear it because you're listening to that one, but it doesn't play at the same place as it was before. You can create a little bit of rhythmic variety that way, which might be really, really nice. Tuning is quite important because some of these orchestra, they tune towards each other and maybe not to other instruments that you have. So you might want to check this. If you find that your other VSTs don't sound so good with these files, just change the tuning here and it will probably work. Otherwise, you can always tune the other VSTs in your DAW as well. Then harmonic shift is what we talked about with the plus and minus. It's just that now we have a little bit more visual, what's happening on each key. And you can change this to be the major or minor key, or you can also do your own version here, which creates some really interesting harmonic differences. And that's pretty much it. So let's go and look into the indie and the noir library as well. So let's take a look at the interface of indie. Noir is actually the exact same way, it just looks a little bit different design-wise, but it works exactly the same way, so we don't have to waste time on that. As you can see, this is quite different to the other interface. The idea is the same, it works the same, you have a bunch of phrases, and the symbols and buttons work the same. But it's one major difference that really makes this a better way to work. You still have to hit the chord, let's say an F. There we go, now I've chosen F or F minor, but now I just have to hit these different keys here. And that sample is being played in the chord I've chosen. And now I can add another key. Or another one. I can hit all of it. And so on. My piano's over here, so it's hard to turn. Anyway, it's so much easier to just load anything up. You just have to hold down that key, and you can release it whenever you like. You can start whenever you like, and I find it a lot easier than the other system. You can obviously still change the chords, and you have so many more samples to play with at the same time. You have up to 12. These are not actually the keys like, you know, D sharp or E. It's just the keys on your piano or your keyboard, so you know what to hit, for example. And the one you choose comes up. So now press B flat here. This sample is shown. You can see the same symbols as before, similar. Purge, remove the modulation wheel, what speed, the score here, for example. And the harmonic shift you can turn on and off, and it's usually on, so you have to turn it off this time if you don't want to use it. And also all these buttons are down here. The offset, the X fade, the pan and volume release is right here. You don't have to go under the hood anymore in order to find it. Also, I find that this picker here is really, really artistically beautiful. It has to be mentioned. It's one of the coolest interfaces I've ever seen. Now, I know what string quartet and string ensemble is, so that's easy, but choosing these are not that easy because it doesn't mean so much. And then again, what else should you say? You know, they mean something to the creator, obviously, but these are really beautiful symbols here that shows quite well what the thing is. So you get an idea, but basically you have to listen to all of them and then find what you like. But I really like that interface. It's really, really pretty. And it's so easy to just start and create music. And you only need one channel this way because you have so many samples at your fingertips. You can obviously have more channels if you want to create more variety, but I find this is way easier to create music than the other system. So here's a workflow tip from me. A really good way to get going with this library is tricky. Sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming when you have all these different samples. It might sound good, but it might not be what you were thinking. So what I normally do is that I unmute all of the phrases but one. I just wanted to say I'm using the minimal one here by Sonokinetic, and it's because it's easier to see all the phrases at the same time at the same window. Also, I'm using complete control because it's easier to see on my keyboard. It lights up, as you might know, but this works really well in Contact. So what I do, as I said, I unmute all of these but one, and I go and look for the style that I want by looking at the samples here, by listening to them. Pretty good. Now that's the one I want, so I choose that one. It's loaded here. And as you can see, you can choose several different styles here, which is excellent. You can see my keyboard when I'm playing them there. So I can try another one. I want the more bassy one. Anyway, I like that phrase. So now I'm going to build on top of that phrase, and I think of the orchestra a little bit as an EQ. I add the frequencies that I need that are not interfering too much with the previous one. So, for example, winds normally are above the strings, not always. That's too low. Let's try this one. Actually, some of the phrases, if you click more than once, you will hear a different sound, and that is because they have several samples loaded. So I like the higher one there. Let's see how that sounds together. I like that. They complement each other really well. And let's see what we have with the brass here. Let's see if this works immediately. It's not what I want. What do we have? Nope. That's the one I want. That's perfect. So this one actually matches the strings quite well in terms of frequency, but I like the texture that it's creating here. Right, and now when I add this percussion, let's see if this one, it might be perfect already. Yeah, I like that actually. So let's keep that. I've sort of created the pattern quite quickly by building up the different phrases on top of each other. All right, let's do a little bit of a cooking show trick, and I will create a few chords and you will see how it sounds like. Okay, so I have created these chords, and also one thing I've done here is that I've added a little bit of a curve in the modulation wheel. And I do want to say this is actually not a dynamic layer, it's just volume, but it's controlled with the volume, with the modulation wheel, I mean, and it adds a little bit of realism. So let's see how that sounds like. That sounds really good, but I find, because I'm very picky, as I might know, that it's a little bit too repetitive, and I sometimes hear tiny bit of glitch when they change. It's very tiny, but I'm picky. So I'm going to add something on top of this. I'm going to add a choir. Choir will be good. So a little bit of a magic transition, and I will have a choir. Okay, there we have it. I've added some choir. So let's see how these two sound together. Right, and there you have it. Quite quickly, I created a great professional sounding, good sounding backdrop that I could have for a magic movie or a game. And I want to show you with this workflow that it's quite quick to get very, very good results. So let's talk about the pros and cons of the Sonokinetic phrase libraries. Do I like them? Yes, I do. And it's not just because I got access to a lot of these libraries. I use them heavily for my mockups, and they really add that cherry on the top to my mockups. Yeah, it's a lot of realism. There are a lot of difficult phrases that are hard to program that I can now do much quicker. I get a great sound out of the box. It's mixed, it sounds good, great musicians, great phrases. Yeah, it's quite quick to get a good results, and I really like that. But I'm actually going to go a little bit deeper into what's difficult about this library and what's not so good, because I want you to really understand that if you're interested in these libraries. I do recommend them, but I want you to know about what's iffy about these libraries. First of all, do not expect to buy a complete package of an orchestra that sounds fantastic. Kind of is the idea, but if you just come home and load a patch and hit a chord, you're quickly gonna run out of juice because it will sound very repetitive. Because these phrases go round and round and round and round. They sound good, but if you just do that, you're gonna sound like a beat very quickly, and that's not what you want to do with an orchestra. So there are a lot of tricks to get around this, and I've shown some of them in the previous section, but you just have to know that there's a lot of tweaking here to be done. You have to add sections, remove sections, change patterns, probably load quite a few of these different instruments, work with the chord structure that I showed before, just to add a lot of variety. And also, I wouldn't really use this library as the main thing and not have anything else. I would use these libraries to bake in with my existing mockups. I would have a solo instruments, maybe a choir, a piano, or strings on top, and bake them in. That makes it sound a lot better to sort of mask some of the problems that these libraries sometimes can have. Let's talk about some of those problems. For example, these phrase libraries are made to fit a certain tempo. They're recorded in a certain tempo and a certain genre. Now, the time stretch tool in Kontakt is pretty good, so you can stretch that quite well, but you start to hear the artifacts quite soon. And if you only have one of those sections, it can be heard. At least I hear it. So you have to mask that well without instruments or more sections. But also the alignment can be tricky in any time. It doesn't always work with just quantizing the chord perfectly and expect that to be a smooth transition. You sometimes have to nudge that back and forth, the chord where it is in the MIDI grid, in order to get a good results. Some of the later libraries, this works a lot better, but just something to look out for. There's a lot of tweaking in order to get this good. It doesn't take as long as creating all this yourself, and you certainly won't sound as realistic, but expect tweaking, just so know. And just to mention again that the genres are quite specific, so don't expect them to work with all music. So really make sure, if you want to get these libraries, that you get the ones that you are interested in. Listen to the examples, but also go to the webpage and check them out there. So I hope this was a useful video for you. Again, I'm not here to sell you instruments. That is really not what I'm interested in. God knows instruments cost a lot of money and it can be very difficult to choose the right one. So I wanted to give you information about an instrument I really like to see if this is for you or not, and how you can get really good at this instrument to get the most out of it to sound even better in your mockups. If you found that helpful, then please hit that like, perhaps subscribe so you can get more videos like this one. You can become a patron if you want to support me further, or if you want to buy these instruments, you can always hit the affiliate link below. That will be greatly appreciated. So until next time, I do hope you compose a lot of music, take lots of care, and see you soon.